Hello, welcome to the second video lesson on Roland Barthes' theorization of mythologies, mostly based on the essay Myth Today from his book, also titled Mythologies. So, in the previous video, we talked about how myth is a second order signifier. So, if you analyze any myth, you will find two layers or two levels of signification. The first order of signification is that of language, and the second order is that of myth. At the level of language, a signifier and a signified combine together to form a sign. Now, when Barth says language, he doesn't mean only written or verbal language, he means any kind of language. It could be visual as well. So, at the level of language, a signifier and a signified combine together to form a sign, and the sign is a kind of product of that process of signification at that level. But at the second order, a sign that has already been constituted by the combination of a signifier and a signified in the first order becomes a signifier to be used again. And when it is combined with another signified, a larger signified, a cultural concept or idea or ideology, then it forms another sign, and this final sign in the second order is called myth. So, this is how myths are produced through this process of two levels of signification. And Barth also has his own terminology for these concepts. At the level of language, a signifier and a signified combine together to form a sign. We have already mentioned this. And this sign that is produced at the first level, at the level of language, Barth calls this sign meaning. So if you think of a word, it is easy. You have a word, the sound image of the word is a signifier, the concept that it refers to is the signified, and when the word and its concept come together, when they come together associatively, then we get meaning. So, and Barth says it is true, that is true of any kind of combinations. And we have already mentioned the cover of the French magazine Paris March, in which a black man is shown as saluting the French national flag while wearing the French military uniform. So, this is an example that Barth has taken. So, the black man saluting the French flag, black man giving a French salute, that is the meaning of the sign. But the sign itself becomes a signifier at the second order, that is at the level of myth. The sign is rich with meaning at the level of language. So it has already gone through a process of signification. So when that first sign is created at the level of language, it is rich with meaning, it is full of meaning. But when it becomes a signifier again, that richness is emptied out and its meaning becomes reduced and fixed. So the black man saluting the French flag has he has his own history, geography, right? Where did he come from? What kind of life has he led? What is the social relations between him and other people? All sorts of things. So that particular image of the black man saluting the flag, if you take it as a sign in the first order of signification, it is rich with meaning. But when it becomes a signifier for the second order of signification, when it becomes part of the myth making process, then that sign is emptied out of its richness. Its meaning becomes reduced and fixed. It's just black man. He just stands for black man, and all the complexities and richness of experience that have made that black man whoever he is, that have given him meaning at the first level, they are all kept aside, they're all swept aside, and the black man is fixed as an image, as a signifier again. So this sign, which was a sign at the first order and which has now become a signifier at the second order, Barth calls this form at the level of myth. So in the first order, the sign that we get as a combination of a signifier and signified, Barth calls it meaning. But this same meaning can be used as a signifier in the second order. When it becomes a signifier again, when its richness is emptied out and it becomes just a pure signifier, Barth calls it form. So the meaning can then become form again. It is again an empty form waiting to be filled with meaning. The signified, on the other hand, is not very different. At the first level also, the signified is a concept. The second level also, the signified is a concept. And Barth calls this second signified, the signified of a myth, he calls it concept. Now the form and concept combine together to form a sign at the second order, which the second order sign, Barth calls it signification, to avoid confusing it with the first order sign. Now this will become clearer if we look at it in the form of a formula, an equation. First level, language. Here signifier plus signified combine together to form sign. And this sign is what Barth calls meaning. But this meaning, if it is emptied out of its richness and used as a signifier again, then that is no longer meaning, it becomes what Barth calls form. And this form is the first element. It is the signifier at the second order, which is the level of myth. At the level of myth, the form that has already been taken from an earlier significatory system, the form combines with the concept in order to create yet another sign, which Barth calls signification. So, first level, signifier plus signified is equal to sign. Second level, level of myth, form plus concept is equal to signification. And Barth says that the movement from meaning to form is a regression, a suppression or taming of richness. But when the form is combined with the concept, it again regains context and purpose and becomes embedded in the world, which means that at the first level, the signifier was already empty. It is arbitrarily combined with a particular signified, and that produces the meaning, the sign at the first level. And this meaning is rich. But from there, we have not a progression but a regression, not a going forward but a going back to meaninglessness. When it becomes a form, it has to be emptied out of its meaning. Otherwise, you cannot imbue it with a new meaning. So at the level of form, the movement is that of regression. The richness is not completely thrown out, but the richness is tamed or suppressed for a particular purpose. And what is that particular purpose? That is whatever purpose, whatever ideological purpose is given by the concept. And at this level, when that empty or almost empty form combines with a concept, it again regains its richness. It becomes part of the world again. And then finally, we have signification. Barth gives us an example of a Basque chalet. Basque is the name of a region in Spain. So this is, you can see an image of a typical Basque chalet. It's a kind of building. Barth does not give us this picture, but he describes a Basque chalet. And he says that if you are in Spain and you're walking around and you can see many such buildings, so you don't really feel that it signifies anything to you because it's just natural, it's just there. But if you're an architecture expert or if you're somebody who's interested in such things, you will realize that there are many points of uniqueness for this particular architectural style. The roofs and the patterns on the front and many other things. So if you see several chalets in Spain, in the Basque country, in the Basque region, which all have some features like this, then you don't think of it too much, but an image stays in your mind that this is basically the what a Basque chalet looks like. Then he says, however, here there is not, this is almost like a first order of signification. You see an image, you see a house, and then you realize that certain characteristics form this house. This house is formed of a certain set of architectural features, and that is how you imagine a Basque chalet. This is the meaning of a Basque chalet. Then he says, now suppose you see a building in somewhere in Paris or somewhere in France. And here I have taken an image of a hotel, a contemporary hotel in France, which is named Le Chalet Basque. Le Chalet Basque means the Basque chalet. So here, this is not a real Basque chalet. This is a hotel which is constructed in France in order to resemble a Basque chalet. And if you look at these two images, this is the original Basque chalet, and this is the hotel that is created to look like, to resemble a Basque chalet. You can see that there are some similarities in the slope of the roof or the pattern in front. A few similarities exist, but not many. There are many other elements of the Basque chalet. If you look here, it is very rich, full of architectural detail. But most of those details have been removed, and only the bare form of a Basque chalet is displayed in here. Now, why is that so? Because all those details are unnecessary when you reduce the chalet from meaning to form. When you make it a form, now here it is a form again, it is just a signifier. And what does it signify? This building in the midst of the city of Paris or any other city in France will signify Basqueness, perhaps, the quality of certain uniqueness that you associate with the Basque region of Spain, because it is not in Basque, it is not in that region, but it is in. Then maybe the food in that hotel might be reminiscent of the food culture of the Basque region, or maybe there are other reasons why they want it to look like a Basque chalet. But what we realize is that it doesn't need all the features of the original Basque chalet. You just need a few key features which will immediately convey, very quickly convey that this represents a Basque chalet. So at the level of form, whatever richness of meaning there was has been emptied out, and this form is now available for use as a new signifier with just a trace of what its meaning originally was. Now we can look at this difference between form and meaning in terms of quantity versus quality. Now the meaning, as we already mentioned, is rich. The black man giving a French salute, for example, has his own history, geography, literature, language, etc. The level of myth, we said that this meaning, which has been emptied out and then becomes form, combines with a concept. Now, this concept is what drives the purpose of the myth. What is the purpose of this myth? A myth is usually made, it is not natural. It is created for a particular ideological purpose. And that purpose is driven by what we call the concept. The concept is already worlded in the sense that it exists in the world, it is embedded in the world. There is some history to it, there is some ideology to it. And when this concept combines with the almost empty form, it gives context and richness again to the form. The relation between concept and meaning in a myth is one of deformation. The concept deforms the meaning. It does not abolish, but rather alienates it from its own history and richness. The meaning remains available for use at the service of the concept. So the original meaning was rich, and it is how does it become an empty form? That is in this process of combining it with a concept. So it's a kind of double movement. The moment you bring a concept to attach to this form, you are reducing, first of all, the meaning of its richness, and you are presenting it as an almost empty or a form where the richness of meaning is suppressed and tamed. But at the same time, when you are combining it with the concept, you are also giving it a different meaning. Whatever ideology is loaded in that concept, that is being infused to the form as well. This is why Barthes calls this relationship one of deformation. Deformation. So to deform something, to twist its form and make it something else altogether. The meaning, the original rich meaning is deformed. It is not erased completely. It is not abolished, but rather it is deformed. Now, just as a signified can have several signifiers, the mythical concept can also have several forms. Like the same meaning can be conveyed by different words, perhaps. Different images can convey the same idea at the first level. Similarly, at the level of myth, also, to convey one particular concept or ideology, you can have several forms. 1,000 different images can signify French imperiality. However, in the case that we have mentioned, that Barthes has mentioned, French imperiality is signified by the image of the black man saluting the French national flag, but many other images can also signify exactly the same thing. And Barthes gives some examples like so a disabled soldier being given a medal for bravery. Such images abound in our newspapers all the time. Newspaper or any other media, we see many of these images. So such images are always assaulting us, and we consume them usually without thinking about them. But if you really stop and analyze them, many of these images are actually myths, or they signify myths. And so what we understand regarding forms and concepts is that forms are plenty in quantity. For one concept, there may be several forms, 1,000 forms. So the number of signifiers is always more, and the concept is less numerous. So quantity wise, forms are more and concepts are fewer. But if you look at it in terms of quality, forms are poor. They are not rich. Their richness has been emptied out. So they are poor images. Whereas concepts are rich. Concepts are already worlded. They are already embedded in the world. They have their own histories and ideologies. And the concepts are rich in meaning. So in terms of quantity, form is greater than concept. But in terms of quality, the concept is higher than form. Then Barthes goes on to talk about how these myths work. So we talked about how a myth is formed. What is the structure of a myth? This two-layer structure. And then he goes on to talk about how these myths actually work. So that means how they actually work their meaning on us. And also connected to that is how do we then interpret or decipher these myths, because the myths are also a certain kind of code, and you need to analyze that code in order to understand how this myth has been functioning. As we already mentioned in the previous slide, a single concept can have multiple forms to represent it. The persistence or repetition of a concept through various forms is useful to the mythologist. This is how a mythologist is able to decipher the myth. So you see many forms all conveying the same concept. So that concept persists for a long time, or you can see at different historical points that concept keeps coming back. It is repeated. Then we identify which are the most important concepts at a certain historical point in a particular cultural context, and that is a first step towards deciphering the myth. A particular tool that can be used to decipher myths, according to Barthes, is neologisms. Neologisms are new words that are coined. A word did not exist to signify a particular idea, so you have to create a new word. That is neologism. And Barthes gives an example of the word China. He says, when you're talking about the nation China, you tend to say China, and that is fine. But this word China is too abstract. If you want to refer to a very particular ideological image of China that a modern petit bourgeois Frenchman will have, then this is an image of what he calls bells, rickshaws, and opium dens. So this is a very specific image of modern China that Europeans have. If you just use the word China to signify it, it is not enough, because China is a very abstract word. From the teachings of Confucius to those of Mao Zedong, the entire history, people, the languages, the geographies, the food cultures, everything, all those are combined in a word like China. So that is too vast and too abstract. Therefore, in order to refer to a particular myth of China that is constructed by Europeans, a myth of China that consists of bells, rickshaws, and opium dens, which is probably the kind of image that you see in any Chinatown in a Western country. In order to represent that myth, Barthes says we have to come up with a new word, a neologism, and he suggests the word sceniness. Sina or Sini, basically something referring to China, Sina or China. Sceniness is the word that he suggests. Nobody is using that word, but what Barthes is trying to say is that when we see a new myth, a very specific myth, a contemporary myth, we will need our own terminology to distinguish it and to analyze it. Analogy is the next tool of myths that Barthes points out. Analogy is necessary for myths to work. Analogy means when you compare one thing to another because of their similarities. The salute of the French soldier and of the black man should be nearly identical in order for the latter to signify French imperiality. This is the idea that he says. Only if you know what a French military uniform is like, and only if you know what the French salute looks like, and if this particular black man is doing those things correctly, he is giving the salute in the correct way and is wearing the correct uniform, only then can the myth work. If you just show some random person wearing some random clothes, just saluting in a different way, that need not convey anything, or that may convey something else altogether. So there should be some kind of similarity, some kind of analogy between the black man's salute and the salute of the white French soldier. However, Barthes hastens to point out that analogies are always partial. The black man should not be completely identical to the white man. The difference is that of his skin color. The very fact that we have a black man instead of white man giving a French salute, that dissimilarity is what makes the analogy work. That is what makes the myth work. Otherwise, if you just showed any white French soldier saluting the flag, it doesn't really convey this particular myth. It might still convey ideas of nationalism, but not in this insidious and extremely powerful way that the Parimatch cover does. And Barthes goes on to say, we have already mentioned this, that myths are motivated by ideology. The motivation of a myth, why do we have this myth at all? Why is this myth created? There is always some motivation behind it, and this motivation is neither natural nor arbitrary. The combination of the relation between a signifier and a signified at the level of language, according to Saussure, was arbitrary. But Barthes says the combination of the form and the concept in order to create a myth is not arbitrary. Neither is it natural. It is motivated precisely by ideology. It is provided by history. Only if you know the history of the colonial conquest of all these black dominated regions by France, only if you know the colonial history of France, only if you know the colonial history of this particular image of the black man, what is their relation with French colonialism, only if you know all these historical aspects can you really understand this myth. So history provides a certain ideology which is the motivation for a myth. Thus, Barthes says that myth is a type of speech defined by its intention much more than its literal sense, and that in spite of this, its intention is somehow frozen, purified, eternalized, made absent by this literal sense. This constituent ambiguity of mythical speech has two consequences for the signification, which henceforth appears both like a notification and like a statement of fact. So, this is how Barth sums up his description of myth. He says myth is a type of speech, but it is a very particular type of speech. It is defined not by its literal meaning, but by its intention. What is the purpose? What is the intention behind this myth? That is what gives meaning to the myth. And so there is a kind of double quality to mythical speech. On the one hand, it is like a statement of fact. In the case of that Parimanch cover, that fact, it is like a statement of fact. It's not actually a statement of fact, it is a myth, but it is like a statement of fact. And what would the fact be? The fact in quotes is the idea that French imperiality is a good thing. French colonialism and imperiality is beneficial for its colonial, even for its colonial subjects, and they are happy and grateful and loyal to the French nation. That seems to be a fact that the myth is presenting us. Actually, it is not a fact, but it is being presented like a fact. But if it is a fact, then you don't have to stress it. Right, then you don't have to specifically state it because everybody knows it and there is no challenge that is going to come towards it. But precisely because it is a myth, it functions not just as a statement of fact but also like a notification, which is something that it is informing you. It is catching hold of you and telling you, listen, French imperiality is a good thing. So in that structure of the myth itself, you can see that there is an ambiguity. Is it actually a fact or not? If it is a fact, then why do you need to convince people with that? And if you are convincing people, then maybe it is not factual. So that kind of ambiguity is fundamental to a myth. And he goes on to say that myth is interpellant speech. What kind of speech is myth? First of all, he says it is a type of speech defined by its intention rather than its literal sense. Then he says it is interpellant speech. It is like what I mentioned about the notification. The myth is the kind of speech that interpellates you. It catches hold of you and makes you think that, oh, this myth is speaking to me. So you are directly addressed by that myth. And then you slowly, when you confront that myth, you feel directly addressed by that myth and you have to engage with it. And most of the time we might end up just consuming passively all the myths that come our way, but we can also question it. But in order to question it, we need to first recognize that it is a myth. So myth is interpellant speech, and he also calls it speech stolen and restored. Speech stolen and restored. You can connect this to the idea of deformation that we talked about. First, there is a language, there is a speech, there is a signification process at the first level. That is what he calls speech, and that is stolen and emptied of its richness by combining it with another concept. And then we have a signification which is again rich, because the ideology and history of the concept have given richness back to the newly formed signification. But this is a new kind of richness, not the old richness. Whatever richness was there in the first level of signification has been stolen away, and now the speech is restored with the kind of ideological content that the concept or the purpose of the myth, the intention of the myth brings in. Therefore, myth is a kind of speech that is first stolen and then restored. So these are some of the important points that Barthes makes about what a myth is, how is it constructed, what is its structure, and how does it function in society. Thank you.